Alright, 1.3 now in Trig is quadratic equations. Okay. You know mostly about quadratic equations, but we're going to go into more detail with quadratic equations. Okay. That's what we're trying in this section. So, by factoring, we already did factoring before, but now we're going to, do some more solving with factoring. Whenever you got a quadratic, you try to get all of the variables and all the numbers on one side. So since I have a positive x squared, I'm going to move everything over to that side. So I'm going to add an x to both sides. So now I have a 3x squared plus x equals 10. And then to move this over, I'm going to subtract a 10 on both sides. And this is what we got. So now that I have everything right there together, all on one side, all right, now let's see if we can factor it. So I'm looking for what multiplies to give me a negative 30, that adds to give me a 1, right? What multiplies to give me negative 30, that adds to give me 1? Well, that's a positive 6 and a negative 5. So I'll do the factoring by grouping. Remember, there's slide and divide as well. You could try. So there's a couple different methods. I think there's a box method as well, but we're going to try factoring by grouping here first. So I group the first two together, and the reason why we did all this work was to realize I split up a 1x into a 6x and a negative 5x. So, and once again here, the order that you split these up doesn't matter. You'll still always get the same factors as your answer. It's not going to make a difference. But anyway, in these first ones right here, I realized they both have a 3 in common, and they both have an x, so I take a 3 out, and an x, and I'm left with an x plus 2, because 3 divided by 3 is 1. Took an x out, so there's 1x left over. 6 divided by 3 is 2, and I took the x out. So how can I make this grouping look like an x plus 2? Well, if I take a negative 5 out of both, alright, if I take a negative 5 out of both, I'm left with an x plus 2, because negative 10 divided by negative 5 is x plus 2. So when I put these together, I take whatever's out in front, and I get a 3x minus 5, and I drop one of those down. So I get a 3x minus 5 and an x plus 2. And now remember, they're set equal to 0. So I need to solve them. So to solve it, I set each one equal to 0 to solve. So to solve this, I add 5 to both sides. So I get 3x equals 5. I divide both sides by the 3. So I know one answer is x equals 5/3. This one, since it's plus 2, I just subtract 2. And I get x equals negative 2. So those are my two answers. Okay. And there's slide and divide. So I slide that over. So x squared plus x minus 30 equals 0. So that's where we're getting this from. So same thing, right? We know that x times negative 5 equals negative 30. X plus negative 5 equals 1. So same setup. That's where I'm getting this x plus 6 and this x minus 5. So those of you that remember slide and divide from before. And then whatever you slide by, right? You slide by and multiply by 3. So I'm going to divide each of those by that 3. So when I simplify it, 6 divided by 3 is 2. And that's 5/3. The reason why I like slide and divide when you're solving is because it's just the opposites. Your answer is a negative 2 and a positive 5/3, because it's whatever makes each of these 0. Negative 2 plus 2. 5/3 minus 5/3. It's whatever makes it 0. So I minus 2 on both sides, and I get x equals negative 2. I add 5/3 to both sides, I get 5/3. So remember, it's whatever you slide by, then you also divide by. So with this one, I need to get everything over onto one side to solve, so I'm going to minus an 8x. So I get an x squared minus 8x plus 16. To solve this one by factoring, you think of two numbers that multiply together to give you a negative 16, that add to give you a negative 8, negative 4, and negative 4. So you get x minus 4 and x minus 4. So when I separate each of those, I solve this one by adding 4 to both sides, so I get x equals 4 as an answer, and I get x equals 4 as an answer. So,
game over, man.
Solving quadratics this way. I could sit there and try to factor it, but if you don't have an x, you just have x squareds but no x's, the easiest thing to do is just square root it and solve it. Because what's the opposite here? The opposite is just a square root. So if I square root both of them, remember the square root, because it's an even, you get two answers, a plus or minus. So you actually get plus and minus the square root of 5 as your answer. Remember, whenever it's an even root, you get two answers. Okay, with this one, right, we already did some solving with these in the last one, but because it's squared, the opposite of squaring something is square rooting it. So when you square root, you're going to have to actually square root both sides. Okay, so the first method here to solve, which is why I'm showing you that this is ridiculous to do it this way, but you can FOIL this whole thing. And when you do that, you get an x squared plus 3x plus 3x plus 9 equals 5. And you end up with x squared plus 6x when you combine your like terms plus 9 equals 5. You can minus a 5 and get x squared plus 6x plus 4 equals 0. But here's the problem. You can't factor that. So you'd have to use the quadratic formula. And your a is 1, your b is 6, and your c is 4. So when you plug it all in, you get a negative 6, a 6 squared, 1 is a, 4 is c. So when you do all this work, 6 squared is 36, 4 times 4, it's 16, but it's a negative, minus the 2.
Crazy fool.
So 36 minus 16 is 20, and then you can simplify that to root 4 and root 5, and root 4 becomes 2. And you also realize, hey, I can divide a 2 out of each of those, so negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. And those cancel out, so you actually end up with negative 3 plus or minus root 5. This was a stupid way to do the problem because, from the start, when you see a problem like this, because it's squared, if you would just start by square rooting both sides, which is the opposite, just remember that it's plus or minus, so it's a square root, so it's plus or minus root 5. So x plus 3 equals plus or minus root 5. To get rid of that positive 3, you subtract 3 on both sides, and there's your answer already. Just remember, whenever you do anything after that plus or minus, to put it out in front of it. And there is your answer, negative 3 plus or minus root 5. That's it. Okay? Basically 2 steps, and you are done. Instead of foiling and combining like terms and all that, which are pointless. This is a much, much easier way to do the problem. Then we have some completing the squares, which we'll do when we come back.